Assalamu alaikum. I am Shariar Ahmed and I welcome you all on behalf of PIDE in today's technical session. Today's technical session will be about the themes in development. I welcome Mr. Chairperson and co-chair to start the session formally.
Thank you, sir. So we start with the first presentation. We have, I'm audible without this. So we have the first presentation, School Grants and Education Outcomes, the impact of non-salary budget reform in Punjab. We have Mr. Kafir Sawa, who is going to present. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss my research with you. I am Kafir Sawa, presenting my paper School Grants and Education Outcomes, the impact of a non-salary budget reform in Punjab, Pakistan. It's a co-author paper with Minzi, who unfortunately could not manage to come here due to the pandemic issues. So I will start with the motivation. Education is considered as the most important ingredient of economic well-being. From a theoretical perspective, education promotes economic growth by improving the human capital, increasing the innovative capacity, and facilitating the diffusion of knowledge. Sen has regarded education itself as an intrinsic good. Development policymakers have also shown their interest in education, and they know how crucial is education for the process of economic development, like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals call for the quality education for all by 2030. But if we take a look of the quality of education in developing country, the picture is poor. Even in Pakistan, the picture is more worse. For example, according to ASER 2016, 48% of students cannot read a story in Urdu among grade 5 students, and 52% cannot perform even two-digit divisions in arithmetic. So there widespread interventions have been implemented in the hope of improving the educational achievement. We divided all the interventions into two broad categories. The first one are the human capital-based intervention, which aims to improve the human capital side of the school through pedagogy innovations, student tracking, teachers accountability, and school governance. And these type of interventions seems improving the educational outcomes. The other type is the physical input-based intervention, which aims to reduce the barrier on physical infrastructure for the school and the students, like providing the computer assistants, libraries, school buildings, sanitation. And there is a consensus that these type of inputs did not have any discernible effect on educational outcome. So a specific constraint that may limit the effectiveness of these physical input-based intervention is the centralized provision of these inputs. So there are four issues arises due to the centralized provision. The first one is the mismatch between the demand and the demand at the local level and provision at the center level. So local stakeholders know much about the school deficiencies, and they can manage resources better. For example, a study in Kenya by Glave et al. They did not find any effect on. They did not find any effect of textbooks on the students' achievement. The reason is that the textbooks provided by the central governments are too complicated, not only for the students but also for the teachers. The second issue is that centralized provision is the more prone to delivery failure. For example, in Sri Lanka, a study by Sabarwal, he did not find any effect of textbooks on the students' achievement. The reason is that most of the textbooks have been kept in the storage and they did not even reach to the school. The third is the political pressure to initiate a visible policies. For example, in developing countries, the politician gave the tabs to the schools not due to that it will helpful the student and teachers equality, but they present as an achievement to their voters. And fourth is the complementarity among multiple input. For example, providing the tabs without providing the training to the teacher that how they can maximize their stock of knowledge, or for example, providing the computer to the school without providing the electricity or internet connection is useless. So what would be the potential solution? Potential solution may be to provide the schools unconditional cash grant to the schools and devolve the financial decision-making power to at the school level. Precisely speaking, a decentralized school grants may remove these four barriers. So, based on this discussion, we designed two research questions for our study. The first is does providing decentralized school grants improve the educational quantity and quality? And the second, does this decentralized school grant have any impact on schools, human capital, and physical infrastructure? Regarding the contribution, we have three sets of contribution in literature. First, we add the evidence to the limited and very recent literature on the effectiveness of decentralized school grants in improving education outcomes in case of Punjab, Pakistan's non-salary budget reform, which to the best of our knowledge is not evaluated yet. Secondly, we examine a real large-scale policy which is more likely to capture the real-world effect. And third, the results of this study shed lights on the Punjab, Pakistan's performances to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal, which has set multiple education-related targets. So I will discuss now the institutional background and the non-salary budget reform. Before non-salary budget reform, an average school of Punjab primary school receives 20,000 from the government, and there are 2,400 from the monthly contribution from the parents. And regarding one point, for the first point, across the visits, we visit different schools across the different districts, and we came to know that there are many schools who did not receive the 20,000 from the government. Some received less than 20, some received 10, and even there are many schools who did not receive anything from the government from last 10 to 15 years. But a rough estimate of an annual recurrent expenditure is approximately 70,000 for a school. So you can see that the income is almost around 40,000 and expenditure is 70,000. So this is extremely insufficient funding even for the basic maintenance of school infrastructure. So against this background, the government of Punjab decided to implement a non-salary budget reform. And in this reform, now the NSB entitlement is calculated on the need base, which includes different indicators like school level, student enrollment, furniture deficiency, and infrastructure condition. Before that, it was a fixed rule base. So the second thing is that school council are made accountable and responsible for planning, managing, and administrating the NSB grant. The other thing is that now, before NSB reform, there are multiple tiers that involved in the disbursement of funds. For example, through finance department, then education department, secretaries, and then DCO, and then school. But now funds are transferred directly from the government to the school council account. And the third is per student funding increased by the $13, which is to the best of our knowledge is the largest intervention in education expenditure, largest intervention in the world to the best of our knowledge. So reform implementation, the left side panel shows the map of the Punjab, and each color represents the divisions, and within division white line represents the district. So in 2013, 9 districts, 1 district from each division is selected into the reform, and which we can show in the cross line. And then in 2014, additional 9 districts, 1 district from each division is selected into the reform, which you can show in the vertical line. And then in 2015, remaining districts were included in the reform. So we collected data from two main sources, one from the administrative sources and one from the independent sources. From administrative sources, we collect the data on schools' financial accounts and infrastructure condition from the annual school census. This data is also used by the Punjab Monitoring and Implementation Unit to calculate the NSB entitlement. Second, we use the teachers and attendance rate from the Punjab Monitoring and Implementation Unit. We use the data of test scores of grade 5 students from Punjab Examination Commission, And then there are two independent sources to measure the English reading and mathematical ability score. We use the data from annual status of education report, and for enrollment purpose, we use multiple indicator cluster survey. So this is the data structure, and we know that the NSB entitlement did not reach to the school till the last quarter of 2013, purely due to managerial and administrative staff. So we considered 2013 as a pre-reform period. This is the summary statistics. I will skip due to the 47% of the schools are the boys, and then 69% are male, and then there are as revealed by the reform committee, the selection of the early districts into phase 1 is purely based on the ability of education officers to update the information to the higher authority. It is not due to the district's improvement potential. So in order to assure that is there any targeting on the observable, we conduct a balanced test, and in which YTR is the observable in district D and division R at baseline, and betas are the differences in mean across the phases at baseline. We plot the different beta estimates. Each bar represents the point estimates, and among 42 point estimates, only 3 shows up the significant, and among 3, 2 are like teacher attendance and infrastructure index are the significant and 10% level. So given a non-experimental setting of the study, we conclude that there is no targeting on the observable, and data is balanced at the baseline. And identification strategy, we focus on estimating the average intent to treat effect. In doing so, we exploit the spatial and temporal variation induced by the policy rollout. Precisely speaking, this is a double difference approach with the variation in treatment treatment timing. So beta is the average, weighted average of intent to treat effect in each year and phase. As a suggestive evidence, we group the school according to phases wise, and then plot their expenditure and the grant they received and the expenditure on the upper side. We can see in the upper panel that before the reform, average school received around 30,000, and there is a then discontinuous jump among the phase 1 district of phase 1, which we can show in a red line. And similar pattern is followed by the phase 2 districts, shows by the green line and then the blue line. And similar trend we can see in the expenditure side. Then we are interested to find out the policy effect on school's financial account, and now after the treatment, after the policy, the average school received 180,000 more compared to the before the reform period, which is almost 6 times before the reform, and expenditure also increased around 3 times before the reform. So as we know that school received the grant and school spent the grant, now we are interested that where the school have spent their grants. So means we check the policy effect on infrastructure. It is positive and statistically significant, which shows the 0.045 standard deviation improvement in infrastructure index. And in lower parallel, we disaggregate the infrastructure index, and we can see that those effect comes from the existing infrastructure conditions rather than the facilities, which we can show in column 5, 6, and 7. The functioning toilet, building condition, and boundary wall. So now in column 2 of upper table, we did not find any effect on sports facility index. However, we find that the teacher attendance is improved by 0.009. And precisely, we are interested in examining the policy impact on educational outcome, and we did not find any policy effect on student enrollment, student attendance, and similarly, we have 2 measures of education quality, like the ability, math ability score, English ability score, then the test score of numeracy and literacy. We did not find any effect on the education quantity and quality. As a robustness check, one compelling way to assess the common trend assumption underlying our ratifications.
Because you are already done with 15 minutes. So
Yeah, I think 1 minute. Chale, it's okay. Increasing the decentralized school grants have a positive effect on schools' financial accounts, improves the school inputs, does not have any discernible effect on the educational outcome. Now the question is why there is no impact on test score. It's not likely to the implementation failure, but the main issue is that it's a school council capacity constraint. For example, one report by ISAP, they mentioned that about 92% of the school council members did not know the procurement rule. 88% they asked for a training that how, means they did not know even the rules that how they can make a budget. And even 70%, 37% are the school council members are the illiterate. And the other thing is that during our visit across the school of different districts, it's some kind of informal competition among different schools that to invest in schools infrastructure rather than in pedagogy innovation and something else, because they want to know that their school looks nicer compared to the other school. The third is that this is a short-run effect, so we expect that if this trend pertain over 5 or 10 years, so after that there may be the positive effect on education quality. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this paper I reviewed in the initial process of screening your paper to the conference, so I selected for the conference. But I do have some suggestion.
Thank you.
And confusion that needs to be, I think the suggestion that needs to be, can add that needs to be addressed here. First, it's a well-written novel, and we focus more on discussing the existing literature, so you can pick the squeeze on that. Because in current so US this okay. Second, the questions are raised. There are two questions. The first one is about investigating the effect of these grants on scores, and the second one is on infrastructure. Okay. But if I look at the results, so the questions, sequence of the question and the sequence of the results you presented in the discussion section. Okay, those needs to be aligned. Third, the reasons that why you didn't know the effect of grants on student scores, and the reason you gave for not finding any effect, and the conclusion section. Those are totally different. Okay. So you need to, like, for instance, in the conclusion, what you say that the school concept, those are not that much effective, okay, are not implemented in that sense that might be effective and leads to improvement in the scores of the kids. Okay, so I didn't find any reference to this, and even any citation from where it came in the conclusion section. Okay, so you need to be careful and just, if you want to add from what you give in the introduction section. Okay, the behavioral aspect you discuss in the introduction section. Okay, so just these are about like the consistency of the arguments you presented in your paper. Okay.
Okay.
Third, the sampling. I have a bit of confusion about the sampling. Did you cover did you count for all the kids or all the schools? Those were covered in the different phases of the program implementation. So there is no discussion about this aspect. You need to incorporate a bit of clarity on this in the universe of the UDCs.
These all school are included in the sample. Yeah, the policy is for all the public school, so we include the all school. Instead, regarding the test score, it's a centralized and administrative data from we get the Punjab Education Commission. It's a result for each and every student who appear in the exam. And regarding the school ability score, it's a survey data, so it's representative at the district level.
Okay, so there is a study from the Punjab government spanning over the same period. Okay, and they reported that after taking these policies while implementing in Punjab, they reported enhancement in scores of the kids.
Okay.
From the PMU, and that is also reported at the project management unit of the PMU and Punjab Education Department. So please refer to those and also cite those. Okay. Because
That is a third party evaluation. That is not the. There is a third party evaluation report for that phase 2013. So not as I know, I will again check. It's not the means independent study.
On the same aspect, so I know
We discussed that report in our discussion.
Enhancement in scores,
Mhm.
but you didn't found the effect of the funds
Mhm.
on the scores. Okay.
Okay.
So please look into those information and just
Okay,
discuss
I will
what they say about this aspect and what you can argue
Mhm.
and conclude about why those results are different than that. Okay.
Okay.
That's maybe a short of time.
Okay. Okay. So I will just provide. I do have some comments more. So
Okay, I will
provide
make
it on your email.
With permission of the chair, I would like to take some questions. Yes, please.
First, the fascinating identification strategy that's very interesting. I have quick questions. Number one, would be good to know on the impact. I couldn't read very well the impacts of the inputs or teacher attendance, which were positive. Are these large? What do they represent? How do they compare with other interventions in the progress? Because the expecting the disappointment is that the impact in the short term on test scores may be that the improvements are small. You have a big sample, so they're significant, but maybe different. We want to know whether they're big or not. And second, because you have a big sample, have you looked at, and I don't know whether you have panel data for the test scores, before the intervention and baseline, whether some students benefit, maybe the best students in the top 20%, the impact on them is positive, or maybe some subgroups, girls, boys, some looking a little bit more into the distribution of students in classes here.
I think it's clear to us. Did you get the question?
Yeah, it's a nice suggestion. We are also working on to make the classification of the top 20% and we are working on it. Thanks for the suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we can take one more question. Anyone? Yes.
सवाल ये है कि एजुकेशन ability की जो आपने निकाले उसमें एक तो आपने पब्लिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस को भी इंक्लूड किया या नहीं और दूसरा ये कि उनके और भी फैक्टर्स है जिसमें उनकी बात है कि एकदम जो है इस तरह सर ने कहा कि आपने उनको इंक्लूड इंटायर डिस्ट्रिक्ट को डिस्क्रिएट करना और उसका इफेक्ट जो है उसको कंट्रोल करना। तो आपके रिजल्ट्स जो हैं जो सिग्निफिकेंट वो नहीं शो हो रहे, तो उसके लिए आपने कंट्रोल के लिए क्या है?
Okay, so it's clear. Like, did you take any other control variable in addition to the factor?
No, we did not have the data on father income and mother income, and these are for the public schools. This policy is for the public schools. Our schools are the public. We did not consider any private school.
It's limited to the
It's
fact
a
that they
means-
were not. So I think maybe another study we could take, and he did not take any other control variables, right? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have to be a little. The second presenter is here.
My name is Said Mohammed Umar, and this was co-authored by Dr. Shahzad Kausar, who could not be here today. So it's basically about uncovering the impact of access to adequate sanitation and drinking water access and its effect on subjective well-being in Punjab. So I would just like to give a brief background on the situation of water scarcity both globally and within Pakistan, because it's the subject of the entire paper. So according to the UN, 2 billion people on the planet live in water stress areas, and 700 million people are expected to be displaced by water scarcity around the globe. In Pakistan, according to the UNDP, is considered in the top 10 countries with the lowest access to clean water near homes. So this is a very prevalent issue within the country. Now moving on to sanitation issues, inadequate sanitation is estimated to cause a whole range of different illnesses within people, and according to the WHO, 45% of the global population, which is around 3.4 billion people, do not have access to adequate sanitation. In Pakistan, according to UNICEF, 2 in 5 people lack access to hygienic sanitation infrastructure. It's an issue that particularly affects women because of the added burden of menstrual health, with 75% of women staying at home due to inadequate sanitation infrastructure. So subjective well-being is the dependent variable of my research, and the reason I took it is because in economics we're seeing a pivot towards different measures of tracking progress. We're not relying on GDP as much. We're seeing happiness and satisfaction. So subjective well-being is a scientific term for life satisfaction or happiness, and it basically measures how one feels overall about their life. So moving on to my research objectives. So I'm basically finding the relationship between water access and access to adequate sanitation and subjective well-being in the most populous province in Pakistan, Punjab. We're seeing the effect on adult men and adult women to check for the disparity between the genders. So the research gap is subjective well-being in general is a relatively new concept in economics. We've seen it discussed in psychology and sociology, but again, the data, the amount of research in terms of economics has not been established as much, and the few studies that do exist, I'm going to mention Nadeem et al., who studied subjective well-being in relation to water scarcity in rural farming households in Faisalabad. But I'm taking it a step further, and I'm doing it across all households within Pakistan. I'm checking the disparity between the genders, and we're using the mixed data set, which is both authentic and large and relevant. So this is the research hypothesis. There's no need to explain this. And moving on to the data and methodology. So we use the multiple indicator cluster survey. It's basically used to track the progress of sustainable development goals within the country. So the questionnaires that we drew the information from was that pertaining to households and water. So there were 53,000 households. Through the aid of 2,000 clusters, the data was gathered. And the amount of women in the data set is estimated to be between 27,000, and for men it was 17,000. So this is the variable construction. We have the both individual variables, household characteristics, community characteristics. For individual characteristics, we took basic socioeconomic variables, including marital status and age and education level. Household characteristics is where our focus variables are. For water access, we took access to piped water, access to bottled water, access to bore well water, and drained spring water. Family size and wealth quantiles were also taken as control variables. And in community characteristics, we took the regional divisions. We divided Punjab into North and South and Central Punjab. We took higher education as a community variable, and we also took improved sanitation. So improved sanitation is being studied both at the household level and the community level. So this was the multi-level fixed regression model. It was used because of the hierarchical nature of the data we're using, in which individuals are nested within households who are nested within communities. So these are our main results, and it was quite interesting. What we basically found was that our most significant water access variables was piped water access and bottled water access. Drain spring was not significant, nor I don't think it was bore well water, which means that these were not drinking water sources that people within the province generally relied upon. And what we found was that bottled water access had the most positive contribution to subjective well-being within Pakistan. We found that having access to bottled water increased the odds of reporting high satisfaction or high levels of happiness by 1.4 times. This was this was followed by piped water, which increased the odds of reporting subjective well-being by 1.1 times. Improved sanitation was significant for women as well. As you can see, access to adequate sanitation or improved sanitation increased the odds of reporting subjective well-being by almost 1.2 times. And at the community level, it was also significant. Now, the results for the men are parallel to what we saw for women, with one notable distinction, and that is that improved sanitation for men was not significant at the individual level. It was on the community level though. And we're going to discuss this as I conclude all my data, because we are running out of time. So, to conclude, what the results basically found was that access to bottled water had the most positive contribution to subjective well-being, followed by piped water. And we did find a disparity between how adequate sanitation impacts both genders. So this is something that was not significant or impactful for men at the individual or household level, but it was for women. And I hope that people will take this research, apply it to Balochistan and Sindh. The situation there is completely different. There are other barriers that they have, cultural barriers, which people can take in measuring the socio-economic variables. Second of all, the mixed data set did not have information on employment, so that was not something we could include. I'm pretty sure it has an impact on subjective well-being if someone chooses to study that. And while our focus is on subjective well-being, we found subjective well-being to be a good measure because it encompasses all different types of well-being, but it's not a substitute. And I hope that people will apply this research for economic well-being, physical well-being, and specifically even mental well-being. So the policy recommendations of what can be done about this issue. Well, a lot is being done on the international and the national level. You must all be, I don't know if you're familiar with the UN's WASH initiatives and the Pakistan's PATS initiative, which is Pakistan's approach to total sanitation. And what we can do is basically focus on both supply and distribution. Supply is not only ensuring that we have enough water, but ensuring that water is retained, it's not lost through pipes. So maintenance is really important. And we also need to assess the amount of water needed before urban expansion. Even where I'm from in Islamabad, we're seeing extreme water scarcity even among middle-class urban households, and that's because we're not finding water sources as the cities are expanding. So that's what's needed. Second is part of PATS, which is already being done, but it needs to be scaled up and increased, which is school-led activism and campaigns for adequate sanitation. So as we said, this is an issue that impacts women the most. So if women do not have access to information regarding adequate sanitation, do not have access to facilities, secondary girls' schools, they can be, that's where the focus can be shifted. and public bathrooms do help, especially in big families. People can go outside the house to seek these services. And second, developing countries, including Pakistan, lag behind in water recycling infrastructure. Piped water came in second. It's not something people rely on the most. They often have to boil it. I'm sure if we can clean it, it would be equal to bottled water, because bottled water is expensive. That's also something we have to consider. So thank you, and I hope this was insightful.
Suleiman sir, lecturer in the University of Peshawar, is the discussant.
Thank you so much. It was a very good presentation. And the very first session is that the main issue is the missing in your research. Then how you separate men and women. The second thing is that in your background and introduction straight for research paper, the main issue was that you are talking very generally. However, research will always talk reference to the evidence, literature is missing in your research paper. My fourth suggestion is that how you calculate cost of living of these people. I mean income level of these people, our household. And the reason do not match with your recommendations. Your policy and recommendation is more than as compared to the regression analysis. Remember one thing, that when you pick up the data from X or whatever, your primary data, econometrics is basically part of economics. Economics is not econometrics. So you just run an econometric model, and on basis of that you can't decide that this will happen and this will happen. So you need to provide some theoretical framework and some evidence from the past.
Yeah.
So all these things are missing in the research.
Yeah.
So if you incorporate all these things, I think this paper will be good.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Suleiman sir, for the useful suggestions, and I think this will help you in improving your
Yes, it
paper
will, indeed.
to take care of it. Please.
It's a very nice presentation. I like your idea. Can you please tell me what is the meaning of bottled water? Is it purchased? And if it's purchased, then don't you think that would also decrease the level of satisfaction that the person is actually getting from consuming the water?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Bottled water is indeed purchased, and but our focus is on having access to bottled water. So it's showing that people who access bottled water means people who can afford bottled water. And we're finding that being able to afford bottled water is increasing subjective well-being. So of course, for lower income households, they don't have access to bottled water. They may have access to piped water, which they boil.
It's just my suggestion. I think,
Yeah.
that in some way the level of dissatisfaction that is associated with purchase of the water
Yeah.
itself should also be incorporated in the model. It's up to you.
Yeah.
I think that it should be there, because that would actually decrease the overall satisfaction that the person is getting from consuming the water.
Yeah, but we also accounted for that in, I skipped over it because of time and because my focus was on water access, but we also took wealth quantiles and found that people who were richer had higher subjective well-being. So that could be associated with the fact that they could purchase bottled water, or they had access to it because they could afford it, like you're saying.
You know, there was a program in the government, I think also in Punjab, where they had a filtered water for different plants installed in different areas. So probably that was not available, the data was not available in the time you were conducting the study, or did you have some idea about that? Because in a number of areas, this filtered water was made available by the government.
Filter water, I took piped water. So
That's different.
I did not take that. It wasn't part of the data.
I just have one suggestion for you, because you have taken the life satisfaction as whole life. So I would suggest why don't you take the demand satisfaction line, particularly like just narrow down your concept and just go for the health satisfaction directly. Because it will it will clear all the ambiguities which the lady just said, that life satisfaction, because it encompasses all the factors which is not actually grasping it, and that is not the focus of your study.
By, do you mean like physical health?
No, of course, but overall health, mental and physical health, I would suggest. So you should narrow down to domain satisfaction rather than the overall satisfaction.
That's true, and that's one of the limitations of my research I mentioned. People could narrow this down to economic satisfaction or physical satisfaction or other kinds of mental well-being. Yes, that is a good suggestion.
Basically, who are like trying to have its impact on the health.
No, this so life satisfaction is kind of vague, but it's basically about how people feel about life overall. It's kind of like mental health. It's similar to mental health.
No, it's not mental health. Life satisfaction is a very broad concept.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not exactly mental health. Yeah, because I measured it through the Cantrell ladder, which basically tells people from a scale of 1 to 10 how they feel about life or how satisfied they feel with their life. So that's what it is. It's life satisfaction. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we have a third presentation. This is on sustaining party graduation level and its livelihoods of the poorest household during a global pandemic. This is by Ms. Aisha from NAST, Neil Boone, Safdar, Joda Bukhari, Jahid Hussain, and Shahida Jalil Al-Basit from the Pakistan Party Elevation Fund. It's going to be online. We have them there.
So this presentation essentially was co-authored by Dr. Aisha Nasnai, and she could not join. So apologies for that. All the questions you may have, we will be more than happy to take questions to her. Basically, the rationale for this paper, which is essentially coming from one of the main studies, which is the COVID study, which is currently under PPF, and which is going to come out almost like in December. The rationale is pretty straightforward. We've got COVID, we had locust attacks, we had floods nationally in the past year in 2020, and going towards 2021 as well. And the statistics as a consequence of these three major events have been dismal. So, for example, if you say 21, the projected GDP growth rate was winding between 1.33 and negative 1.4. Overall, globally speaking, there was a huge surge in the number of poor people. Among all of these, the greatest impact, specifically speaking from the perspective of Pakistan, the greatest impact was felt by the poor, the vulnerable, specifically those who had no savings in their names and who did not own any assets. People who were working on daily wages, were daily wage laborers and had nothing in their ownership. And this finding is also corroborated by the PBS findings which came out specifically for the first day. As we speak now, Pakistan has seen the second and the third wave as well, which I'm going to talk again about. But even the PBS data on the first wave really established the fact that there have been massive layoffs, there have been massive income decline, there have been massive food insecurity across households, which actually prompted the idea of doing the study, wherein we took the main tool that we actually studied was the LIP. Now, what's the LIP? The PPL, the Pakistan Poverty Elevation Fund, has got this program going on, NPGP, National Poverty Graduation Program. NPGP uses this very, this very comprehensive tool called the Livelihood Investment Plan. So when under NPGP you go to any beneficiary household, and when I'm saying households, I'm talking about the poor and ultra poor households across our 23 target districts. So when we initially reach out to these households, we sit with them and we develop this very exhaustive LIP, Livelihood Investment Plan, wherein we cover all these socio-economic indicators. So in the study, what we did was we made the baseline, the pre-COVID baseline, this LIP. All of these LIPs, which were part of the baseline, were developed up until March 2020. So I'm speaking about 2019 se leke March 2020 was when all of the baseline was done. We compared this baseline with the post-COVID Poon surveys. Now, when I'm saying post-COVID, I'm strictly speaking about the first, the second, the third waves during the time the COVID was around. So we conducted Poon surveys with the same set of beneficiaries for which we had the LIP. So the beneficiaries we sampled in the baseline, we conducted Poon surveys with them between summer 2021 and September 2021. So essentially covering or capturing the impacts they absorbed, they experienced during the first and the second and the third wave of COVID. These surveys were conducted with nearly 3,700 households, and I'm talking about ultra poor households across 17 districts of Pakistan. And essentially, the indicators we analyzed, were the demography of the main earning members of the household, their professions, their employment status, how many hours in a day and how many days in a month were they working for, the collective monthly income of the household, and of course, the collective monthly expense of the household. How frequently was the household saving? What was the amount of that saving? The kind of assets the household owned. What was the market value of those assets? Did the household take any loans during COVID, etc. On this, we conducted pretty straightforward SPS, like longitudinal analysis. This was our sample. Just to give you like a quick overview, we went across all 4 provinces. Of course, we had to oversample some districts from some particular province. This kind of like captured the geographical heterogeneity of power across Pakistan. What did we find? What came out of all of this? So, this paper essentially talks about 2 districts out of the 17 districts which were captured in the study, and why exactly these 2? We speak about Peshawar in Sindh and Zog in Balochistan. That's because these 2 are the districts which capture particular regional heterogeneities of poverty. And according to the classification which we do at PPF and other development sector organizations do, these 2 actually fall under the ambit of extreme poverty. So these 2 districts experience some of the worst poverty in Pakistan. So the Peshawar pre-COVID baseline findings were that for nearly 72% households, there was only 1 earning member. None of the households had any bank account. 84% of the sample households were experiencing extreme poverty, and only about 16% had chronic poverty. So chronic poverty in the category is just a tad bit better than extreme poverty, you can put it that way. 21% of households own house, but when I say house, we're usually talking about single piece of land, it's just 1 room and nothing beyond. 23% of households own livestock. We also, I think, another interesting thing we could be talking about is how many households were saving. The majority actually were not saving, which speaks about the implication of poverty in the district. We also see that the amount of loan they were taking, the maximum loan they had taken at some, just to remind you all, I'm talking about the baseline pre-COVID levels. The maximum loan amount was nearly 150,000, and I think a huge chunk, that's around 40% of the households, the maximum loan they've taken on average was just 50,000 rupees. And I'm speaking about entire course of their recent memory. This table right here shows what's been the average monthly expense on food, utilities, health. And when you look at the maximum, minimum, when you look at the percentiles, you recognize that these households are not really spending a lot each month on these consumption needs. Now, these are the baseline findings for Peshawar. Now let's talk about the post-COVID survey findings for Peshawar. We observed that the monthly income in Peshawar went up by nearly 10,000 rupees. But why would that be? We infer that that could be because, as COVID hit, a lot of family members, a lot of households started involving minors and other non-earning members in the household as contributing family workers, especially in the agricultural fields. And also, it's important to know that it's exactly around this time, so COVID wave 1, COVID wave 2, COVID wave 3, when NPGP and PPF's emergency economic assistance was rolled out in these districts and in these households, which we believe might have triggered some, livelihood generating activities. We also see that food spending went down by nearly 1,300 rupees. We see no significant difference in health and education spending. And when I say difference, we are, of course, just remind you all of comparing pre-COVID baseline to post-COVID surveys. Daily working hours went up a bit. There was no significant difference in savings. And yeah, I think one interesting thing to talk about is the percentage of loan takers. We see pre-COVID, it's at 11%. But we see across COVID wave 1 and then the second and third waves, the percentage of loan taking propensity of the household has gone up remarkably. And it's particularly remarkable during the first wave that we feel that the immediate COVID impact was like settling in. So the massive shocks were actually felt at that time, and the loan taking propensity went down a bit during the second and third waves. Let's quickly talk about Zoe. I think I have a few minutes left, I guess. Zoe they feel is perhaps much worse off in terms of poverty than Poorest. Around 94% of the households have no other earning member except for one. No household has got a bank account. In Zoe, we see an interesting correlation between poverty score and the number of young people under 18s in that household. So the more under 18s in a household, the poverty score of that household would go down, which essentially means the poverty intensity of that household would increase. 86% of the household had cell phone, which is a great thing. But also interestingly, if you see here these two blue graphs, you see that no household is saving anything at pre-COVID baseline levels. And this middle pie chart you see written unlawful, what that essentially means is, so when we spoke with these beneficiaries in these households, they talked about the number of work hours per day that they would work for. And then we compared that with the regulations existing in Pakistan, which according to those regulations, you cannot make an adult person work for more than 9 hours each day. Based on that, we categorized whether or not the working conditions of people in Zoe were lawful or unlawful. But there's a lot of caveat around it. Like there needs to be a lot of research on whether or not this work that they are doing beyond 9 hours, is that willingly are they doing it or it's forcibly? So we need to see that. Again, a table about their monthly expenses and very dismal numbers here. Specifically on utilities, health, we see the maximum, the minimum being 10 rupees, as low as that. Post-COVID civil finance report, we see no significant difference in food spend. But an important point note here is that already the people in Zoe were not spending too much on food anyways at baseline. Their health spending went up a bit, but that may imply that people in Zoe probably were migrating to other districts because of the lack of, severe lack actually, of health infrastructure in Zoe. Only one household among those we sampled in the survey reported spending anything on education. And that too got decreased during COVID. So at the baseline level, there was only one household which reported, it was spending anything on education, and that spending also went down by 2% during COVID. The daily work hours went down a bit. The savings were very interesting. The savings were just reported by 2 households at baseline. And that really implies extreme poverty levels in Zoe. And those savings went up during the second and the third wave a bit. The value of assets the household owned went up a bit. I think what's important to note here again is the loan taking propensity of the household, which if we see of course has gone up during the first wave and the second and third wave remarkably from the baseline levels. But what's different here than Peshawar is that the propensity has sustained during the second and third waves as well. There's like 98% to 97%. That wasn't the case in Peshawar. And this perhaps speaks about how extreme the poverty levels and have been in Zoe, and how remarkably, how remarkably impacted the capacities of poor people in Zoe to graduate out of poverty due to COVID. What really comes out of all of these findings? Based on these findings, also categorically, for this paper, we reflected on lessons from PPF's own COVID emergency response fund, which was around 413 million, which was rolled out to around 66,000 households in around 113 UCs of 22 districts across 4 provinces, and which categorically targeted female household heads, people with disabilities, households which had perhaps only one or no earning member, which had no productive asset. So this PPF COVID emergency response fund categorically targeted those households. Based on findings which came out of this response fund, findings which came out of the PPF program poverty reduction, specifically rolled out during COVID, and findings which came out of PPF, revitalizing youth enterprise program, which was also rolled out pedagogically during COVID. We come up with these 4 recommendations. Now, the first is shock-adjusted dynamic targeting. In Pakistan, we see that a lot of poverty-related programs, they have very static kind of way of targeting poor people. And these, what happens is that not only do these macroeconomic shocks adversely impact the welfare indicators of poor households, but they categorically have very profound impact on the welfare of the bottom quintile of the population. So it's very important to move beyond these static welfare scores for effective targeting of beneficiaries. And therefore, we recommend dynamic assessment. So, for example, when any flood or any shock is happening, any pandemic is happening, programs can actually launch shock responsive social protection. And this can happen through, for example, shock-adjusted proxy means test, EMP, which is a tool the Benazir Income Support Program uses. And there could be other shock-adjusted targeting methods, of course. So further research is very needed to determine how welfare indicators could be more dynamic than static. The second is district-wise vulnerability maps. A pretty straightforward recommendation though, that to effectively kind of circumvent the impact of significant disruptions, there needs to be a profiling of the major professions in each district. That we need to create a vulnerability map of each district, which would indicate the prominent professions and subsectors in that district. So that would perhaps allow for a preemptive identification of professions which are more prone than others to specific disruptions. The third is package-based social safety models, and I think so we've kind of like prescribed 4 packages. What normally happens in the targeting of poor people in Pakistan is that programs really come up with a very uniform kind of prescription for poor people. So across all districts, across all provinces, there would be just like the same kind of interventions happening across households. But that is not the case with poor people because their needs are very heterogeneous within the poor people. So what we're saying here is that let households decide what their needs are based on their demographics, based on their skill sets, and based on their consumption needs. And based on their self-assessment, you can prescribe a specific package to them. It could be an employment-intensive package where you give trainings to them, some fixed stipend for consumption scrutiny. It could be a package which is education-intensive, so that will focus the young people in that household. It could be health intensive or it could be food intensive, where we could have something like electronic ration cards probably for women of the household. And the final recommendation we have is diversifying interventions based on the saving patterns of each district. So across districts, we actually are able to map not just the saving patterns but also the factors which determine these saving patterns. We could perhaps determine that which districts have a greater propensity to save among the tiers of poor and ultra-poor households, and which have the lesser propensity. So in districts which have a greater propensity to save, you could probably come up with some models of business cooperatives where public-private partnerships are putting in some capital investment, bringing in a lot of beneficiary groups together to form corporate business, small-scale land holding of some kind. Because you come with the assumption that these people actually are more likely to save and sustain any business model. That can happen. The final thing we'll talk about quickly is the caveats, the limitations which the study.
Ms. Shahira, can you please submit a little quick because we are already, the time is over.
No, so I'll just take like a minute to contextualization first. When we polled the beneficiaries, they did not have an incentive to listen to our calls and to continue the survey. So we had to put in our enumerators, had to put in that effort, and that gave us a little recall bias, maybe that they perhaps did not really were able in this kind of movement recall what their incomes were, what their saving patterns were 6 months down the line or so. So these are the overarching limitations that I'll stop.
Thank you. Let's have, if we have got any questions. So, Ms. Shahira, I think we are audible. Can you hear us?
I can.
Okay. Ji, any question? Ji.
Thank you for the very exciting presentation, especially for me. I have two specific questions.
आपको आवाज आ रही है? एक मिनट में आपको आवाज आ रही है?
I'm sorry, I this is no.
थोड़ा सा आप लाउड करें, otherwise I can put it. Please आप.
Should I come and speak?
You can speak from there. I'll do it from your behalf.
All right. So the labor supply variable that you have described over here, now you have said that the labor supply has increased by approximately one, especially for the province of Sindh. Now, when you're talking about these poorest of the poor people, these people, most of them are working on the farm. So, how have you described the way that they are working over there? Because they're working on the farm, it's difficult. They're not having a 9-to-5 job per se. And how have you assessed the level of income that they're earning? Because most of them get a payment for their labor after 6 months in terms of the wheat that has been, for example, has been harvested, or the kawaz that has been harvested. So how have you described the income level? And I just have a concern that it's difficult to gauge just an increase of 1 hour or 0.7 hour when these people don't have fixed timings. And secondly,
Okay, let me put the first question because
Sorry, you will have to repeat the question.
Okay, the question is that these laborer actually work on farms for a fixed period of time, and normally they are paid after 6 months when the crop is, is harvested. So how come you calculate this increase in the labor hours? That's
by 1
By-
unit or 0.79 units, and
Yes.
how have you determined their income level?
and how you have determined their income level when they are paid after 6 months?
Okay, so in our case, beneficiaries, they do not have a very static source of income. They might be working in the agricultural lands, they also are individuals. So they're really experimenting with whatever sources they could get. Despite the fact that most of them are actually engaged in agriculture, most of them are also working in livestock, and most of them are actually dealing with laborers. That gave us that room to actually gauge what could have been changed in the number of hours, and that essentially is coming anecdotally from these beneficiaries themselves. When we would phone them up, we would actually put the questions in terms of first of all the first year of COVID, so early 2020. And then the second and the third waves combined. So more recently, like when the survey was happening summer 2021, that essentially was the time. So the responses were based, of course, on the variations which had happened between the two times. And yeah, so I mean, the bottom line perhaps would be that beneficiaries, the source of income not really static, not really set in stone. They go for whatever work they can get on a given day. There are also a lot of under 18 members of households which are practically non-earning on paper. So they work as contributing family members, like I mentioned. They could be working in the agricultural lands, and they could be working elsewhere. So during our survey, we actually emphasize the fact that even if you have these people who are working temporarily, who work part-time, who work in informal gigs, we actually took their information as well. So we're not really just talking about people who've been working full-time for a very long time, but anyone who's productive.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. The second part, Ji.
That during COVID, these people faced another shock, especially I'm talking for the province of Sindh because I recently conducted a primary level survey, especially with these poorest of the poor people. That's why I'm talking in relation to that. That not only they were suffering from COVID, but they also suffered because of the flooding which destroyed the crop. So most of these people have actually not earned anything last year. They are in fact in debt with the person who is the owner of the land. So when you are saying that that the propensity to take loan increased, it was not just due to COVID, it was also because of the flooding that destroyed the crops.
Did you get the question, Ms. Shahira? She says that the taking of loans or other things may be related not only to COVID but because of the floods. So did you have any measure or did you take this into account?
No, absolutely. So this could perhaps be called as one of the caveats of the study that we actually acknowledge the fact that in the past year there have been massive floods, locust floods. Especially considering the fact that a major chunk of our beneficiaries come from the agricultural sector, like I said, So we at ADAR did not really, distinguish for these.
Okay, thank you.
these
Last question. Okay, two questions from here. We have to sum up, right? Doc Saab is here and. Ash.
Good morning, Shahina. Shujat is here. Basically, I serve this PASD. So I think straight away. One dimension because I PPF has been using the PISP data because we shared the data in 2015. This is also making the cash assistance to these poor beneficiaries. And second, you know that on the PISP intervention, that is through bank. And in 2020, I think in 2020, 2019, we signed the agreement where there is cushion of saving account as well. And in post-COVID, there was also SARS emergency cash. So these were some government interventions. I think in 12,000 rupees they were shared through SARS emergency cash, and there were also two tranches in 2020 year. And second, there was also private philanthropy. We have managed a telephonic survey in PIDE, and we found that there was a lot of private philanthropy that was given.
You will have to repeat the question.
I'll do that. Don't worry. I'll do that. Don't worry.
Sir.
Okay. Okay. Now the question is that the Benazir Income Support Program also distributes money amongst the people, and they have bank accounts, and also they had two.
Saving accounts, sir.
Okay, they have saving accounts. So.
PPF is using the PISP data for
Okay.
targeting its.
So what is your view on that? What's your intake on that?
I think we are the best person to answer that, but I guess yes, that's a very rational approach to it. I think the indicator of not having a bank account, not being financially included, was actually studied in this paper at pre-COVID baseline level. So I'll have to go back and see how much of in-depth analysis of having bank accounts did we actually do for post-COVID surveys. That could be an important aspect. So as far as I remember, we did have this analysis for pre-COVID baselines, which was again before March 2020, when even our own interventions and PGP interventions are not really fully rolled out.
Okay, thank you. जी आपका question हो गया या? Yeah.
So as the researchers have mentioned, the income levels are not static, and I'm wondering whether the two survey periods coincided in terms of whether interviews conducted in the same time period. I'm not sure if you mentioned that, because there's bound to be a lot of seasonality in the income that you've mentioned, especially if these are agriculture households, and I think this is related to the first question that was asked. If income levels are not static, then is it fair to take a difference before COVID and after COVID, and whether you can speak to that a little bit? Also, I'm wondering, can you just quickly tell us this exact intervention by PPAF, how is it related to asset ownership, or whether you're specifying any conditions as to where they're spending the funds, or is it just a simple cash transfer? Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Okay, one aspect is the seasonality of the income. If you relate it to crops and you relate it to rural areas, so naturally the income is related to yes. So were the surveys conducted during the same period, the same seasons? I mean, the pre and the post. So was taken into account the effect? That's the first question. Part of the question.
Okay, so the straightforward answer would be no. The surveys were conducted between summer 2021 and September 2021, and the baselines were conducted between September 2021 and March 2020. So that, of course, is not as linear as we would like it to be. Very interesting point there. So again, they are not really accounted for seasonal crop diversity.
So how if
I mean, so we're actually try to take stock of the baselines and how, of course, I mean, so when we were conducting surveys, of course, there was a huge factor of the floods coming in and disrupting the seasonality of the crops as well. But we, like I said at the beginning, we were not able to actually distinguish for that. So essentially, we're taking stock of pre-COVID and post-COVID levels.
But that season is an important factor, I think. Yeah.
It is, and I agree with that.
What's your second part?
Just a little clarification on how the program is related to asset ownership.
Okay, how the program is related to asset ownership.
Okay, just to quickly also make comment on the first question. I think, there was so many logistical limitations of conducting the survey with phone, with beneficiaries, with them being highly disincentivized after a huge day of work of, picking up calls and staying on board, that it was very difficult to, even structure timing of the surveys very periodically. So at the end of the day, we knew that the surveys would be as fluid as probably the natural scheme of things. So that's one thing. The second thing is NPGP is currently active in about 23 districts across Pakistan and 4 provinces. What we do is, I've talked about the LIP tool. We do that. We develop LIPs for each household based on this data. We also simultaneously conduct our own poverty scorecard surveys through our partner organizations. We've got multiple partner organizations through which we actually implement the program across the districts. Once the poverty scorecard surveys are done, once we have the BIS data, once we have the LIPs developed in households, once we have the exercise of community validation, where we go and speak with the community members to establish that yes, this household is in fact poor and is in fact in need, we actually come back to the LIPs. Within the LIP, we have a very important question about the 5-year vision of that household. And based on that vision, based on the household's own determination of their needs, and based on our own model of what works and what does not work. For example, a huge chunk of our assets are based in livestock. But now we're trying to diversify because research shows that livestock is perhaps not as effective as we would want it to be. What we do is we then go back to these beneficiaries and we give out assets, tangible assets of about 60,000 rupees. And it could be anything from livestock to enterprise to chinchi rickshaws to actually whatever works in terms of the value chain of that particular district. So we've got the value chain studies, the market assessment studies coming up, and we reflect on that, and then we determine which assets will be the most productive and income generating assets for the households in a particular district.
Okay, thank you, Shahida. Good presentation and good luck. So this is the end of it. Sorry, we short of time and we couldn't take more questions and we could not discuss in details. Personally, I'm from marketing, economics is not my background, but anyhow, I had to do it. So we have another session there. Temur Jatta Sahab is coming. यहाँ से हम straight away वहाँ पे पहुँचेंगे. ये सारा हमने जल्दी इसलिए खत्म किया ताकि हम वहाँ टाइम पे पहुँच जाएं. ठीक है. तो यहाँ से आप प्लीज काइंडली जो हमारा ऑडिटोरियम है यहाँ से सीधा